So I'm going to talk about a couple of examples that we've gone through Bel-Jan development with two projects. One is Crawford Block in St. Clair, both within the city of Edmonton. So I'm going to talk about the Crawford Block. This is an existing 3-story building built in 1912, located just north of the Strathcona Hotel. In fact, you can probably see it just on the left-hand side there. It was a 3-story building with 19 boarding suites in there and main floor retail. For some of you who may know, there's Gravity Pope has their store in there, and formerly Artifacts was the other retailer. There was an extension built off the west of this property in the mid-50s, which was a single story. So we actually were originally approached by the broker of this site saying, hey, you guys kind of do some different developments, maybe this site will interest you. We looked at it and said, well, there's not much redevelopment opportunity, at least not from our perspective here, and so we walked. Lo and behold, of course, as aggressive and tenacious as brokers can be, they came back and said, hey, the vendor is going to make some price concessions, and I really think this is a good fit for you guys. So we looked at it again. And as we looked at it in a little bit more detail, we thought, okay, what can we do? What's our rights under the current zoning? And so we looked at it and we said, well, you can do 4 stories, you can develop X amount of units in there. We'd have to tear down and do a whole bunch of shoehorning. I don't know if this is something that we'd be interested in. But as we looked at it further, in fact, there were some changes happening to the direct control zoning within the city of Edmonton. One of them had to do with removing parking requirements for new uses and expansion of existing buildings. We thought, well, hey, wait a minute here. Maybe we're onto something. If we were to want to redevelop this under the existing zoning, we'd have to provide underground parking. It's a small site. It's a site that's not that would be very difficult to put parking in, and it's a site that's extremely walkable. So yes, developer in Edmonton, let's maybe develop. Is there a possibility we could develop an apartment use or a new apartment house without any parking? So what we proposed ultimately was a 5-story, 40-unit apartment addition off the west side. So from a developer, what did we need? We needed increased FAR from 2.5 to 4. So that was something we realized that's a fairly increase in considering the neighborhood at the end of the Old Strathcona, one of the most coveted neighborhoods in Edmonton, one that certainly gets the attention of a lot of people. We also had to increase our height from 14 meters to 17 meters in order to get the 5th story. We also, the big two was increasing the use area from 464 meters square to 700, so almost doubling that. Likewise, in almost tripling the building area that was set for the direct control from 700 square meters to 2,300. So when you actually look at it from a numbers perspective, that's a lot. And as a developer, you kind of think, okay, well, hopefully we can get to where we're going. And what's the risk? Is there a payoff at the end of the day? We also, no parking. That was another big thing. And ultimately we knew we needed community and the city support. So we went through the process, and early on we met with 2 key stakeholders. We were advised through planning. We met with planning early before we even started the rezoning process and actually really finalized our development concept. We met with planning, saying, okay, here's what our plan is. Here's what we'd like to do. What do you think our approach should be? And so they said, well, first off, obviously, we believe that's good. You're trying to do additional density and the whatnot on here, but there's a couple key stakeholders you have to involve. So we spoke with the Old Strathcona Business Association and the Old Strathcona Foundation. And we reached out to them. We said, okay, this is what we want to do. And in principle, they said, hey, we like kind of what you're doing here, but we ultimately know that there's an existing 1912 historic building that you've purchased with this. So would you be adverse to designating that as a municipal historic resource? Well, at first we thought, okay, maybe what does that encompass? What's our risk of actually doing so? What was our plan to keep that building and utilize it and just add on to the back of it? So we went back and we looked at it, and we ultimately said, okay, hey, that's something we'll do. Basically, by virtue of going through that municipal historic designation, so getting a bylaw entrenched so we can't tear that building down, plus we get money to help rehabilitate the exterior, we ultimately got support from the OSBA and from Old Strathcona Foundation. They said, the density, not a problem, no parking, whatever, height, we live with it, everything's fine. You've designated this building and you've got our support. And ultimately, by virtue of going through the designation and working with administration, they said, hey, we're going to waive rezoning fees for you guys because you've designated this municipal historic building. Fantastic. I mean, that's, time is money, and when you're at the beginning process, you're spending lots of money. So having that savings was definitely a plus. Furthermore to that, it actually only took us about 6 months to go through the direct control process. And in an area such as Old Strathcona, I think that's quite remarkable, considering the type of reaction, both either positive and negative, you could get, particularly considering the type of density and development we were proposing here. So we were quite happy. We spoke early with the city first. We got in early with speaking with key stakeholders, and ultimately we were able to get a direct control approved in 6 months. In fact, I think that direct control could have been done quicker. However, there was a certain process in order to get the bylaw approved for the historic aspect, which ultimately kind of bumped our rezoning. So I think we probably could have got that DC1, if there was no historic aspect, completed in roughly about 4 or maybe 5 months the most. So I think it's a remarkable time, and it shows what collaboration and early communication and working together can get you. And what did the community get? Well, they got a municipally historic or designated building. They also have a design that activates the alley. So one of the things is, as crazy developers we are, building an apartment building, a 40 unit without any parking, we also actually designed our retail to orient onto the alley. And part of that has to do with there's a big drive in that part of Old Strathcona to activate the alleys and provide more opportunities for retail. So in the plan here, you'll see right away, we actually oriented our retail to front onto the lane. And ultimately, what else? Well, more density in Old Strathcona, which makes it a lot more of an appealing neighborhood than it already is. So here's a quick couple of images of what we were planning. So in the upper left-hand corner is the existing building. You can see just off to the west of it, the darker building there is the new addition of the 40 suite apartments. To the upper right-hand corner here shows what we're proposing with the new apartment building. Another thing, we actually originally went in with a little bit more of a modern design, and part of our philosophy with going a modern design in the new building was to ensure that the existing historic Crawford Block kind of retained its own traditional look and feel. We didn't want to override it by virtue of trying to mimic traditional architecture. However, through discussions with the city, community, the OSBA and the Old Strathcona Foundation, they said, yeah, the modernism, it looks good, but we really, really, really want to ensure that actually that architecture, that feel and look is maintained, particularly in this part of Old Strathcona, which actually is a provincially designated historic zone. So we went with something a little bit more traditional. It's a very tricky thing to do from an architecture standpoint, and I don't know if there's any architects in the room. You either can do it well or you do it terribly. And I think in this case, kudos to Hodgson Schilf, which is our architect. I think they've executed that quite well. So we have main floor retail fronting the alley. We've got 40 units of new apartments that we're going to be developing off the west side, retaining the Crawford Block as a historic resource. We're going to maintain the 19 suites that are in there. The plan is actually to take those suites and convert them into more self-contained apartment units, so we would reduce the density from 19 to about 10 units. But it's ultimately a project that we're very proud of. We have our development permit, and we're just in the process of more or less fine-tuning our costing and hopefully signing a contract here to start construction early this spring. Here's a second project that we worked on, known as the St. Clair. It's in the Forest Heights neighborhood, and there's a couple people in the room that I know that worked on this. And so we originally actually purchased this gas station in 2012. It was actually came from us from the broker who was had the listing from Imperial Oil. Said, hey, Imperial Oil is getting rid of these sites, and it's a gas station. And we've actually worked with old gas stations in the past, and we knew the Brownfield Grant Program and how to navigate these things. So it didn't scare us that when, gas station, okay, forget it, we're not going to waste our time. So we went through the process of saying, well, what can we do with this site? It's a relatively tight site here, just a little over 13,000 square feet in area. And certainly, you've got some great frontage on 106th Avenue, there's some decent transit, you've got the Hilltop Pub to the west, single detached residential uses to the north. It's got potential. So through due diligence, found out the site was clean, everything was great. So we figured out, okay, well, let's see what we can do here in terms of a mixed-use development and see what type of, see what we can get here. So we met with planning, and we spoke about our idea about wanting to do something that was a little bit more medium density, adding in some main floor retail. But we also, again, from a parking standpoint, we said we don't necessarily feel that following the zoning bylaw is something we think is necessary given the location. So we want to certainly push back in terms of what the zoning requirement would require from parking. So tight site, in infill circumstance, and we want to really reduce our on-site parking requirements. Well, typically we know that what that ultimately will lead to from a potential opposition standpoint. So we needed height and density, obviously, reduce setbacks in order to fit the parking lot and the building onto the site, and reduce parking requirements. And that was a major one at the end of the day. So what did we ultimately get? So we submitted for direct control on the site, obviously. We did work closely with administration, and one of the things they said, you know, we support philosophically the reduced parking, but we need you guys to go back and we need you to do a study to determine, is it supported? Can we support that from a technical standpoint? So ultimately we have to retain a consultant to do a parking assessment. And ultimately what landed up happening is that we submitted the report. It determined there was sufficient on-street parking to satisfy some of the demands. You know, the actual requirement from a zoning bylaw standpoint, we actually needed 45 parking stalls to meet the zoning bylaw as per the strict interpretation. And that was based on our one-bedroom, two-bedroom combination plus the retail. We were going in with a total of 28 stalls, all in. So the philosophy is that, you know, we feel that some of the people who are living here may not have a car or require a car. And, you know, we are finding from a trend standpoint, particularly on these infill sites that are close to the core, a lot of people don't have a car, don't need a car. So why are you providing the parking that may never be utilized? So we ultimately went in with 27 stalls for the 27 residential units, one stall for the commercial, which was just around 3,000 square feet of commercial. And we ultimately went in with also a shared parking ideology, saying, okay, during certain peak hours when residents are less likely to use their parking, that can be shared for the retail uses. And so that was something that was accepted by administration. So again, we work closely with transportation, and through some back and forth and negotiation, we ultimately agreed to that parking ratio. And we thought it was a victory for, obviously from a developer standpoint, but also from an administration standpoint, where they're open to that. They said, look, we just need you guys to prove to us. And so the willingness was there. It wasn't like, no, this is zoning bylaw, sorry, but that variance is way too great for us to support. But we got some opposition from the community on the parking. We actually met with the Community League, and we presented what we were planning on doing and the whole zoning, and asked them what their concerns were, and we didn't hear much. You know, there was some, well, parking might be an issue, parking could be an issue, maybe we got issues with parking. We also work closely with administration as well, and so that direct control process, from the time we submitted it to council, 5 months. 5 months for an infill site that we ultimately required a significant amount of density, reduced setbacks, reduced parking, shows the cooperation that we had with the municipality at that time. So literally at the 11th hour, so we're in council, didn't hear anything from the Community League in terms of any type of opposition, and in fact at that council meeting, they originally signed up in support, and then right when the mayor was saying, oh, so-and-so here to speak on you know, the Community League, oh, no, we're not in support of it anymore because of parking. Well, when you do an about face like that, I think at the last minute, it doesn't show that, you know, you've certainly thought about why you were there, going from support to non-support. And I'm not sure where that arose, but nonetheless, I think it was certainly a victory for us, and a victory for a lot of infill developments, that sometimes the strict interpretation of the zoning bylaw is not something you can't carry with you. And that flexibility from both the administration side and also the developer side. We actually also worked with adding some parking. I think, if I'm not mistaken, we originally were going with a less parking ratio, but ultimately by negotiating out through transportation, we did increase that slightly. Again, what did the community get by that? Obviously, a higher and better use on a vacant gas station site. Something that we know that the City of Edmonton Council is really pushing on. No, they're not as dangerous and contaminated at the end of the world as we think. Brownfield grants certainly do help, and I encourage any other municipality that has vacant gas stations that don't have such brownfield grants, if you're really adamant and you really want to see these sites redeveloped, they go a long way. They go a long way from a cash side, and you know, it certainly helps. And new residential and commercial space. So here's what we're proposing. 106th Avenue is on the left-hand side there in the bottom picture. 82nd Street is to the right. 4 stories, main floor retail. The parking is actually located just to the right-hand side of that development. So our development actually overhangs parking, so it is sheltered, it is concealed. The dominant frontage on your dominant streets are active uses. This one too, development permit approved, and we're also just fine-tuning our construction costs and hopefully find ourselves in a position where we're essentially ready to go by this early spring. So I guess to sort of summarize things, it's infill development takes a different perspective. One that's obviously you have to be prepared to collaborate and communicate and interact with all interested stakeholders and parties early. If you try to wait and leave it to the end, or something you have to do because it's a process or have to do because it's a policy, you'll find yourselves those approvals going from 5 and 6 months to 7, 8, 9, 10, and so forth. And it goes back to, infill. Yeah, there's a lot of risk, but if you go in with, I think, the right attitude, the right development program, by understanding the characteristics of the neighborhood and understanding what you may or may not be going up against by virtue of communicating with them and getting them involved early, the better off you'll be. And so far, we've seen that with our approval processes, and it's been one that we don't go in there saying this is how it's got to be done because we've done this elsewhere. We know with each and every site it's going to be different, and it's going to be different players at the table from both the municipal side and the community side. And so ultimately you just have to sort of work collectively, and you'll realize that it's not that hard, but it's not that easy.